So let's get started. Thank you everybody for coming. This is a talk in the Wellbeing Special Interest Group series of seminars. You may have seen that we brought by a lot of interesting speakers in the last couple of years, really, and all of the talks are also made available online afterwards. And I'm super excited today, actually, because I'm a really big fan of the research of Professor Mel Slater. Mel is a research professor in psychology at the University of Barcelona, but he's also a faculty member in computer science at University College London. And his work just on sort of how embodying somebody else in VR has really very far-reaching and very interesting consequences. So I'm excited to see all of you here today. And yeah, let's get started and welcome Mel.
So thanks very much for inviting me. And thanks to Patty and Misha, and also Mary for doing the organisation. And this is a strange title, From Lenin to Einstein, but I think I'll show you right towards the end that even being Lenin can be quite good for you. So I'm going to mainly talk about, well, let me just give the outline. So I'm going to first of all introduce the idea of illusory body ownership and agency and show how this is used in virtual reality. And then I'm going to show a series of applications: diminishing racial bias, self-counseling, cognitive enhancement, the historical reconstruction, which is where the Lenin one is, and also conclusions, very briefly. So first of all, what do we mean by illusory body ownership? A body ownership illusion occurs when there's some contradiction between multisensory data that the brain tries to resolve by producing an illusion. And a very good example of this goes back to Lackner in 1988, and this is something you can try yourselves later, is that it's called the Pinocchio illusion. And the subject of the experiment is this one. He has his eyes closed, and this person in front's only needed for his nose. He doesn't have any other role. And the experimenter takes the arm of the subject and stretches it out to touch the nose of the one in front. And what she's doing is she's synchronously moving the finger of the one in front to touch the nose and tapping the nose of the one behind. So imagine it from the point of view of the one behind. Their eyes are closed, their hands out like this, they're touching a nose that they feel with this finger, and they're feeling synchronously on their nose, the nose being touched. So what the brain tries to do is integrate these two different things into one overall perception, one overall percept. But the problem is, it would be okay if it was like this, but since the arm is outstretched, there's a contradiction. So how does the brain try to, and the brain doesn't like confusion, it always wants to have a hypothesis of what's going on, because this is safe. If you have a hypothesis, that it's a lion, it won't eat you. So it's safe to always have a hypothesis of what's going on. And the solution it comes up with is this, which is impossible to describe. You have to experience it, which is why I suggest that sometime you actually try this. It doesn't work on everybody, especially it doesn't work if you keep saying, when's it going to work, when's it going to work? You have to just relax and be into it. So this is another one you can try, which is more famous. Since this was published in a one-page paper in Nature in 1998, it's had like 2,000 citations, and it's spawned an entire industry. So this is a rubber hand in front of the subject who's looking at the rubber hand. He can't see his real hand because it's hidden behind the screen. And what the experimenter is doing here is synchronously tapping both the rubber hand and the real hand synchronously in the same place and the same timing. And so again, there's a contradiction, because the subject is seeing this hand being tapped, but he's feeling his own hand being tapped. And the visual capture, or the effort of the of the perceptual system to come up with some conclusion about what's going on leads to proprioception, the feeling of where your hand is shifted to here. Again, I can't describe it, but you can do this really easy. You just need a glove and a sleeve and fill the glove with something and get some screen, and you could do this yourself. And in both the Pinocchio illusion and in this illusion, it's really important that the tapping is quite synchronous. If it's asynchronous, the brain just says, okay, nothing's going on. There's no problem to solve, really. And another illustration of this effect is that if before the experiment, you tell the subject, close your eyes, point under the table to where you feel your hand to be, of course they'll point here. But after even a few seconds of this stimulation, you say again, close your eyes and point to where you think your hand is, then they'll point much more towards this. This is called the proprioceptive drift. So the critical thing is the synchronicity, the synchrony rather, between the touch and the vision. So here's an illustration of how this is. Of course, this is the rubber hand. We just put gloves on there's no sign that it's your hand or not, though that doesn't really matter, to be honest. So you do the synchronous tapping for a while and stroking. Notice it's same time and same place. And as you can see, it's quite a strong illusion that people do respond very well to this. Now, how do we do this in VR? Well, in VR, this has gone right back to, actually, Jaron Lanier gave a talk in London that I hosted last week. And he pointed out that how he was doing this in the early 1980s, where he embodied himself as a lobster and using all kind of different muscle measurements, he was moving the limbs of the lobster and having the feeling that this was a lobster body. But in those days, people didn't realize the significance of this, like for neuroscience or psychology. They were doing it to explore and experiment and find out the limits of this new thing, virtual reality. And then since the 1990s, studies have demonstrated that apart from the kind of thing I'm going to talk about, that having a virtual body is very important for presence. If you're in a virtual environment and you look down and you're invisible, this kind of breaks the illusion of presence. So just having even a few polygons in front where your body should be really helps. Several studies, again, there's many, many papers that have shown that having a virtual body, you know, when you wear a head-mounted display, you do distance judgments wrongly. Having a virtual body improves that. And then Bailenson and Yi introduced in the mid-2000s this Proteus effect. And the idea of that is concerned with how the type of body you have influences your behavior. And their idea about how this works is a social psychological one, that you infer your behavior based on how you think other people would evaluate someone with that body. But quite independently of that, there's been this whole industry in cognitive neuroscience, which has grown up from the rubber hand illusion, which has got increasing interest on how the brain represents the body, and virtual reality based on multisensory integration, the vision and the touch, or the movement and the vision, whatever. And virtual reality is a really excellent tool for that research, because the fact is that you can't really experiment with the body because it's always here. You can't kind of in one condition take it away, in another condition put it there and so on. But in virtual reality, you can do that. So how do we get to we've seen the rubber hand illusion, the nose illusion and so on, but how do we get to a whole body? Well, Petkova and Ersson from Stockholm, they introduced an idea where you have a mannequin wearing a pair of cameras pointed down looking at the mannequin, and those cameras feed this head-mounted display. There's no head tracking, so you must be looking down for this to make sense. And then just like the rubber hand illusion, the experimenter synchronously taps and strokes the belly of the mannequin and the belly of the person. And so from the point of view of the person, what they see when they look down is the mannequin body. They see the touch, and of course they feel the touch in their own body, and they therefore get the illusion that the mannequin body is their own body. Of course they know, in all these illusions, you know they're not true, they're perceptual illusions. And the point of the knife is that when you put the knife against the body, you get a stronger arousal event. So you look at skin conductance and it shoots up. But if the stroking is asynchronous, you don't get the same effects. So you don't get the subjective illusion. You get some arousal, but it's not as great as when the stroking is synchronous. So in virtual reality, what we typically do is this, that we don't, what we can, as I'll show you in a second, you can use visual tactile synchrony, like was in that one, but here we use visual motor synchrony. So when she looks down, she sees a virtual body substituting her own, and when she moves, the virtual body moves. So this is visual motor synchrony, which produces this illusion of body ownership. Or here, we have both visual motor and visual tactile. So the person's moving, the body is tracked, so they're moving, and the body moves with them. And when these balls strike the virtual body, little vibrators on the real body fire, and so they get visual tactile and visual motor. So we did a study once which showed that both visual tactile and visual motor will contribute to the illusion. The illusion is more likely to be brought on with visual motor, but if you have both and you break either of them, so if you break the synchrony of either visual motor or visual tactile, then you lose the illusion. But visual motor seems to be very powerful. So this is just to say there's been many studies now over the years that show that this body ownership illusion works, and it doesn't really matter what the body is. So in this one, we had men embodied. This was the first one we did. We had men embodied in the body of a girl, and there was a virtual woman stroking the shoulder. And while the woman was stroking the shoulder, a real person was stroking the shoulder of the real subject. So you got this visual tactile synchrony. They saw the virtual woman stroking the shoulder, and they felt it on their own body. And also we had visual motor, at least with the head, and so on. If you look down, they would see the girl's body, not their own body. So that was the first one. But we've also embodied people as children, and that works. Or as I'll talk about soon, we embodied white people in dark-skinned bodies, and that works. It doesn't seem, or even in purple bodies, it doesn't seem to matter about the body, the appearance. What really matters is the multi-sensory integration, visual motor or visual tactile, or all of these. So there's been loads of work done to show that this body illusion occurs. So there's overwhelming evidence now, both from the rubber hand studies and the studies in virtual reality, that show that taken collectively, these, by our experiments, it doesn't mean ours, but the general area, and this is quite early based on the rubber hand illusion, the experiments suggest that the so-called body image, despite all its appearance of durability and permanence, because we think our bodies are pretty stable and they only change very slowly over time. So our body image is a transitory internal construct, a temporary shell that can be profoundly altered by the stimulus contingencies and correlations that one encounters. So it's like all the time the brain is deciding, what's my body, what's the current multisensory data that I have to tell me how my body is. And that can be changing quite dramatically and also rapidly. So the rubber hand illusion, typically it takes about 20 seconds for 80% of people to get that illusion. So that's ownership of a body. Now I want to talk about agency. So agency is the sense you have that it's you who carried out the action. So I pick up this water, and I know I picked up the water. It's my agency, my responsibility. So what we considered here is, can you even alter you can alter ownership of the body. Can you even alter agency over actions? So we considered what happens when your owned virtual body carries out an act that you didn't do. Can you have the illusion that you did it? The act in this case was speaking. We put participants in a life-size virtual body. They either had, it's a bit more complicated than this, but for explanation, I've cut it down to the two main factors. They had synchronous virtual body with synchronous, they had visual motor synchrony or asynchronous movements for a life-size virtual body. And at a certain moment, the body spoke 45 words. And the fundamental frequency of the voice of the virtual body speaking was always higher than that of the participant. So the way it looked is that before the experiment, we recorded the people speaking and we measured their baseline fundamental frequency of their voice. Then they had the virtual reality exposure, and all they did is stand in front of a mirror, move and look down at themselves and move, and that's all, nothing else. And then at some point towards the end, the virtual body itself started speaking. The subject themselves didn't speak. And then they came out of the virtual reality, and again we measured the fundamental frequency of their voice. And the variable of interest is the difference of post minus pre. So did the fundamental frequency of their voice change? So here's how it looked. I always have trouble with it when this video doesn't start. Yes, now it started. So I'm going to wind it forward a bit. This is, so we had two conditions, synchronous and asynchronous. This is an example of the asynchronous. So as you see, the subject is not doing anything, but the body's moving. So the body moves of its own accord independently of the subject. The other condition is synchronous. And then the body just starts speaking. I can't seem to change the volume here. But it doesn't matter, they're just saying 45 words. And then this is the asynchronous one. That's all that happens. They spend a few minutes moving. Some point the body starts speaking. They either have the synchronous or asynchronous. And then again we measure the voice frequency. So what we found is, I won't do all the details of the data, but there's a much greater, as you'd imagine, a much greater perceptual illusion of body ownership in the synchronous condition, and a much greater illusion of agency over the speaking. So you ask them in a question, to what extent did you have the feeling that it was you doing the speaking? And it's high in the synchronous condition and low in the asynchronous. And not only that, but afterwards, when we ask them to speak, those in the synchronous condition, the fundamental frequency of their voice also increased. So in other words, that they shifted their voice towards that of the virtual body. Those in the asynchronous condition didn't do that. And then we did another experiment, exactly the same, except instead of using visual motor to induce body ownership, we used visual tactile. And that what happened is that the subjective illusions were the same. In other words, they had the illusion of body ownership. They also had the illusion that it was them who were doing the speaking, but the fundamental frequency of the voice didn't change. So I can show you how that one looks a bit. Again, I'll wind it forward. So everything's the same. So that looked like this. They just sat there. There was no body tracking, only head tracking, but they were just looking down and in a mirror, so the head movements didn't really matter. And the ball was striking them in all different places. And then at some point the body started speaking, and the subjects weren't speaking. Again, we can't hear it here, I don't know why. So if we look first of all at the columns saying VM, visual motor, this is the one where the subject's movements, real movements, were replicated by the movements of the virtual body, and this is the change in fundamental frequency of their voice. So those who had visual motor in the asynchronous condition, you see there's really not, well, it decreases actually, and there's reasons why it decreases. But for those in the synchronous condition, the fundamental frequency of their voice massively increased. Now if we compare that with visual tactile, there's not much change. It's around about 0 anyway in the synchronous condition, and a bit lower than 0 in the asynchronous condition. There's a massive difference between the visual motor induction of body ownership and the visual tactile. So body ownership is associated with illusory agency, irrespective of whether it was induced by visual motor or visual tactile. That's something we already knew. However, the change in fundamental frequency of the voice only occurs with the visual motor induction. And what I think is happening is that you have the true agency beforehand over the body movements, and that generalizes to a new motor plan for speaking. So it's as if the kind of brain is saying, this is my body, I'm moving it, it's speaking, I must be speaking, therefore I prepare to continue speaking in the same way. New motor plan, and when afterwards they speak in the higher pitched voice. But for visual tactile, since there's not this first part, this real agency, that the body's moving like you do, then this new motor plan doesn't happen. This was just completed and published recently. Now I want to move on to the second one. So, yeah.
And was there a sense that was their body also diminishing?
No.
First?
No, so the visual tactile or the visual motor, they both give high levels of body ownership.
Yeah.
Of course, because they couldn't move in the visual tactile one, we told them not to move. They didn't know if they would have moved, whether the body was moved. So in that one, they also inferred that they had agency over the body. But in fact, the change in behavior of the voice, that didn't happen. So what I've done so far is I've shown how these body illusions work, and also they work with respect to agency, which is quite scary in a way. Like, imagine you're embodied in a remote robot. I mean, we're doing this with avatars, but you could do the same thing with a robot, which we've done. So you could be here, I can have my remote robot, I'm seeing through the eyes of the robot, I'm moving and it's moving the same, and then the robot does something that I didn't do. I might think I actually did that. So it actually raises some interesting legal and ethical issues when you think that you're doing something, but you didn't, but nevertheless, because of the setup, you think you did. So I've shown how those things work. Now I want to look at an application, because even more interesting than the fact that you can get ownership over a body which is not yours is the actual implications of that. Because the type of body may carry with it information that then affects your behavior. So the particular example I want to look at is implicit racial bias. And as we know, people tend to categorize each other into in-groups and out-groups, and race is a very deep-seated example. And we wondered whether embodiment could influence this. And in particular, we're concentrating not on actual opinions, not on a person's opinion about other races, but their implicit bias. And implicit bias is more to do with things, more to do with your unconscious behavior than your beliefs. So you might be completely very, very liberal and not care anything about race, but then you go on a bus and unconsciously you choose to sit next to X or Y. You're doing a job interview and unconsciously the race of the person influences your judgment. So implicit bias doesn't mean that you're prejudiced, but it reflects implicit bias, obviously, which is likely to be socially determined, which I'll talk about more a bit later. And there's a test called the implicit association test, on which there's been massive research down in Harvard, and they find that this implicit association test correlates with real-life behavior. So this is how it works. It's a very fast reaction time test. What happens is that you're shown a face, and then you have to classify it very fast on a computer, for example, pressing a left button or a right button. Is it African American? This is the American version of the test. African American or European American? And then you see another face, and again you do the same. And then you have a word like honest, and you have to classify it. Is it unpleasant or pleasant? Very fast. Or rotten, pleasant or unpleasant. And then it carries on the same, but now it mixes together the categorizations and the qualities. So here you see a European face. You have to choose, is it African American or European American? But you'll see underneath there's the words pleasant and unpleasant. And here similarly is African American face, and again you have to choose, but you see the words underneath. So what happens basically is that if you can do, let's call it white and black just for the sake of labeling. If you do white, pleasant, black, unpleasant faster than white, unpleasant, black, pleasant, then it's showing implicit bias, because you're more able to join together the white with positive words and the black with negative words than the other way around. And remember, this is not a questionnaire. You can't really cheat on it. Well, I guess you could if you practiced a lot, but who would bother? You can't really cheat on it because very fast, and actually they know you're cheating because they know the average times it takes people to make these selections. So in our first experiment, we had 4 groups of 15 female university students. They were embodied in dark skin, light skin, purple skin, and that was to check that what we were finding wasn't just to do with difference, it was to do with really with race. And then there was another group who weren't embodied. They looked down, there was nothing there, but they did see a body in the mirror, which was dark skin, but it didn't move the same as them. So 3 days before the experiment, they did this implicit association test. Then they had the virtual reality exposure, and then straight away they did the implicit association test again. And what we were interested in is the difference of the pre minus the post minus the pre. So here's the conditions: embodied in a white body, a black body, purple body. Actually, this one is no body, but it's the one in the mirror. There was another part of the experiment where some characters were just walking by. And it was very simple. Whoops. All that happened is the subject was there in a completely bland room, looking around. They saw themselves in a mirror in one of those 4 different conditions. And if Sheila would look down, she would see the virtual body. And all that happened is after a while, some characters walked past, 6 characters, black and 6 white, and that's all that happened, and nothing else. And that took about 12 minutes. Now, this is the difference of the post-IAT test minus the pre. Higher values mean more bias, and lower values mean less bias. And what we find is that the only reduction happens for those embodied in the dark skin body. And I'll point out here there's an increase for those in the white skin body. Why, I don't know, but you'll see this again in a minute. And then no change in the non-embodied or in the purple body condition. So this, as I'll mention soon, I got this result. I didn't quite believe that after just 12 minutes of this you could have this effect, but I'll come back to that. We did another study where, again, we embodied white people in a black body, and we wanted to, again, see if it reduced the implicit bias. But here we wanted to see, does the effect hold for some time? Because in the last experiment, we took the measure immediately after they come out of the virtual reality. So here we did it 1 week later. We also wanted to see, does multiple exposures have an effect? Do multiple exposures have an effect? We had 3 groups. One group did the IAT test, waited 1 week, had their first exposure, waited 1 week, and then did the second test. The second group had 2 exposures, 2 days between the 2 exposures. Then they waited 1 week, and then they had the second exposure, second IAT test. And the third group did it 3 times, and again, after 1 week, they had the post measure. And these were 90 participants, all females, University of Barcelona. You can ask me later why it's always females. So the experiment looks like this. So here we used a full body tracking suit, the OptiTrack, to get the visual motor synchrony. And first of all, everyone has a period where they don't do anything except move. They look in the mirror and move, and they have the white body or the black body. And then their instruction was, follow the Tai Chi teacher. We use this for 2 reasons. One is it made them move, looking at their body in a mirror. And second, it gave the excuse why some of them were coming back 1, 2, 3 times while they're learning Tai Chi. So they did this for a few minutes, and they're either in the white body or the black body. No, we didn't explicitly say that. No, we didn't tell them that, but that's what was happening. So if they come the second time, they're doing it again, they might have thought, oh, this is why I'm here. But we didn't say that you're there to learn Tai Chi.
But they don't know they're there to look at implicit bias, right?
No, they have no. Well, in a way they do, because they did the tests, but yeah. I'll come on to that in a minute. We have another one I'll show you next. So here I just wanted to point out that if you look at the bluish ones, this question, these are the medians, the thick horizontal lines are medians, and the boxes are the interquartile ranges. and the whiskers are the more or less the ranges of the answers to the questionnaire. So this one here, my body, is to what extent did the body feel like it was your body? And this one is, to what extent did you feel you have two bodies? This is a control question. So if first of all you look at the blue ones, you see they're all high, and it doesn't matter if they're in the white body or the black body. Just as I said before, this body ownership depends on multisensory integration. It doesn't depend on appearance. The blue ones are my body. I have the feeling that this is my body. Okay, so it doesn't matter if it's the black body or the white body. It doesn't matter if they have 1, 2, or 3 exposures. It's always pretty high. Compared with the control question, which is the extent to which you feel you have two bodies, your real body and the virtual one. We don't want them to feel they have two bodies. We want them to feel they only have one body. So you can see all the control questions on the whole much lower than the others. And this is another one. This is how much the body I saw in the mirror seemed to be my body. And again, they're all high. The blue ones, they're all pretty high. And much higher than the control question, which is how much did the body seem to look like you? And here it does get a bit higher for those in the white body. That gets, at least the variance gets higher. And that's because it does look a bit more like them. But again, they're all pretty low compared with the question about the body in the mirror. So in terms of body ownership, it's just to emphasize again, how the body looks doesn't really have an effect. It's more the multisensory integration. Now, these are the results on the IAT. Again, more bias up, less bias down. Again, we see that for, at least on the first exposure, for those who only had one exposure, for those in the white body, the actual bias increases. And for those in the black body, it decreases. And in all the other conditions, for those in the black body, it decreases. So it was another confirmation of the same finding that we had. Yeah.
Did you have black subjects?
No, no, that would be something to do, but we're in Barcelona, it's like not easy to find. Also, it's not easy to find men, because we're in a campus with 85% women, and this is the reason why most of our subjects are women. Not in every experiment, but in many of them. So the last one I want to show, it could be argued as kind of being hinted. Yeah.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
Did you ask the participants what they thought the purpose of the study was?
No, we tell them afterwards, but we didn't ask beforehand.
Oh, I meant ask afterwards.
Yeah, we tell them afterwards, yeah. So you could argue that, okay, we didn't ever say anything, this is about anything to do with race, but they did have the implicit bias test beforehand. Okay, in the second experiment 1 week before, maybe it doesn't have a big effect, but maybe it does. So the third one is really the subjects would have no idea at all what we're measuring. And this is based on the idea of mimicry, where it's called the Chamelion effect in social psychology, and it's long known that people in social harmony with each other tend to unconsciously mimic each other. So for example, one may be kind of going like that, and the other might be tapping their foot in the same rhythm. They're not explicit copying, and they don't typically know they're doing it. And it could even be to the extent that their breathing becomes in rhythm. I mean, that's a very deep social harmony. So people in social harmony tend to unconsciously mimic each other. And what we were interested here is we considered whether interaction with a virtual partner with the same skin color as your virtual skin color would lead to greater mimicry. And so we had here 16 people embodied as white, 16 embodied as black. They interacted with a white or black virtual partner. We waited 1 week, and then they did the other way around. So for example, if I'm embodied as white, first week I might be embodied as a white or black partner, and the second week I do the same task, but again I'm interacting with a white or black partner, the other one, the one I didn't get the first week. And what we measure is the number of mimicry events, because the virtual partner does things like occasionally it might go like that, or scratch the face, or do some event. And we wanted to count how many times the subject unconsciously copied that. And of course they had no idea we were measuring that. They were wearing body tracking suits, so we could measure those things. I mean, we had all the data. but they had no idea that this is what we were measuring. So this one, this is too loud. Thanks. So all they're doing is, can we have this light off here? Is it possible? So what they're doing, thanks. What they're doing is they're describing some pictures. You see here the virtual character is making a gesture. They're describing some pictures, the other one describes a picture, and this is all that happens. And this is your partner here is a white character, and in another condition the partner is a black character, and so on. This is with a black character, I think, and so on. That's all. They do this for a few minutes. And what happens is there is greater mimicry when the virtual partner has the same skin color. So here, if we look here, these are the means and standard errors. So if somebody embodied as white mimics their white virtual partner more than the black. Somebody embodied as black mimics the black virtual character more than the white. Or here's another way to see it. Those with the same skin color mimic more than those with the pairs where there's a different skin color. Now, when I got the first result on this, the very first study I introduced, I somehow didn't believe that 12 minutes could make a difference to implicit bias. But it turned out that this group also in London, I mean, not also, but they were in London, they were doing a very similar experiment, but they didn't have virtual reality. They used a black rubber hand. And they got very similar results to us. And we came together and we reviewed our joint results in this paper, Intrinsic Cognitive Science. And then basically these results of the reduction in implicit bias have been found at least 4 times. I think this group has done some other studies as well that I haven't caught up on. So it's at least 4 times. Our 1, 2. The one that I just described also had an IAT test, which also gave the same results. So that's 3. Their 1 is 4, plus some others that they've done that we haven't done. So it seems to be fairly well established that this happens. Why is a different question. What time do I finish? 5-ish. Okay. So the next one I'm going to talk about is self-counseling. It's another application of the same idea of embodiment. And as everybody here knows and is probably doing it right now, including me, we talk to ourselves on the inside all the time. Usually we're problem solving or something like that. But when you talk to yourself on the inside, inevitably you only see your problems from one point of view, which is your own point of view. So what we wondered is, can you use this body ownership to externalize the one that you talk to on the inside as if they were another person, and then talk to yourself as if with another person. But obviously that other person really knows you very well because it's you. And you may be able to realize things you can't know stuck inside your own body. So here's how this works. You can embody somebody as anybody with one first-person perspective, 1 pp over the body, and like visual motor synchrony, real-time motion capture. And here, for example, you can embody someone as Sigmund Freud. So we took this idea, and what we did is, in the first part of the experiment, well, sorry, not in the first part, in the first thing the person does is we scan them, and we get an accurate representation of their body, which they can see looking down at themselves or in a mirror. And the other side of the room is Sigmund Freud. And then they explain a problem to Sigmund Freud, a personal problem. And then the second time round, they are in the body of Sigmund Freud, and they see and hear themselves explain the problem. But now they're Sigmund Freud, and they can give an answer back to themselves. And so you keep swapping back and forward, having a conversation with yourself. This could be a bit louder, thanks.
They then enter the virtual reality and they are embodied in their look-alike virtual body. And they see instructions written on the panel.
It says, explain the problem.
In this case, they were told to explain their problem to Freud.
then they are in Freud's
When they
body.
finish, they are moved into the Freud body.
It says, listen to the person in front of you and then answer them.
From this new perspective, they listen to the problem they just explained. And then, after listening, they can offer some advice.
This person doing this didn't move his body very much. But normally all the body, the movements, gestures that they do would be replayed. And so it goes on.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Is that what they look like in real life? From Freud looking back at yourself, is that a virtual representation?
It's a virtual representation of the person after being scanned, yeah. Yeah.
Freud's advice.
So they keep going back and forward
Freud's voice,
as long as they want. And this just illustrates the scanning. So the virtual body looks pretty much like them.
I'm curious.
This is me talking to the founder of, it's the founder of Gestalt psychology named Fritz Perls, sorry. Yeah.
I'm curious whether it helps to hear somebody else say your words, so that you would
Yeah.
be Freud, but looking at another man in this case.
It's a
saying
good
your
question,
words,
yeah.
Because then you would be able to take more distance.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't see it as yourself.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. We don't know it. We don't really know yet. I mean, it's certainly powerful in the wow factor when you see yourself on the other side. But we haven't done an experiment to see if you replaced. But although we've done it, of course, we haven't done the experiment to see if this wouldn't be me, but somebody else, some other virtual body, whether it would be better in terms of the counselling outcome. And when you speak back to yourself and then you hear yourself, when I would be in this body and I would say something, when I'm back in my own body and I hear it, I hear my voice disguised, right? So you don't hear your own voice give the answer. We haven't got this right yet for women. This was a program that Vice TV did about this.
Can you describe us what you see? So I'm in a room. There are some blinds. There are huge windows on both walls. A light directly in front of me. Freud is looking at me. Sometimes when I'm at work or I'm maybe a little bit stressed or distracted, I can find myself accidentally like picking and scratching at my hands, and I often don't even realize until I've already somehow, like, I don't know, almost like drawn blood on my thumb or my hands, and I don't understand why I'm doing it, and I often don't even realize until I've already somehow, like, I don't know, almost like drawn blood on my thumb or my hands, and I don't understand why I'm doing it. You could take some deep breaths when you find yourself starting to pick at your nails or your hands. Maybe you could find a way to take some deep breaths and become aware of it.
To pick at your nails or your hands, maybe you could find a way to
As I said, we haven't got the voice right for women yet.
where
Can you summarize what you found out that you didn't know before?
I think just the idea of distracting myself. I think it's a way of distracting myself, but it's also a way of coming back to myself. And I didn't realize, I didn't expect that.
So, I mean, a typical example when we did the first experiment is that somebody would say, I'm having a big problem with my boss and they're treating me really bad. And then as Freud, he said, well, have you done anything to upset the boss? And he said, no, I haven't done anything to upset the boss. Then back as Freud, he said, but can you think back? Is there anything you might have done that upset the boss? Then back in his own body, now you come to mention it, I do remember something I did. that was quite upsetting to the boss. And it somehow, in his own body, he couldn't access or process his own memory, but seeing it outside as somebody else, he could. And this is how I think it works. It's like you're literally distancing yourself from yourself and then able to see things that maybe you can't access when you're embodied as yourself. So in that... yeah.
So have you tried making the virtual character as the person identical to the self? I mean, I'm wondering if
Yes.
that would really happen.
Yeah, I haven't explained. The first study that we did, we had a number of different conditions. You're embodied as the counselor, we call it, as Freud, or a copy of yourself, or as Freud, but with asynchronous movements. So what happened is that everybody improves their mood about their problem, because just talking about it improves. But those in the Freud body that moved synchronously improved the most. Yeah. So it's like somehow having the different body and being outside yourself was the best one. But it's early days, and this is really, really new stuff. So in all of these things, his body ownership was high. I just want to emphasize again that remember these I didn't say, but these are all young men embodied in the Freud body, yet nevertheless they felt body ownership over the Freud body, the same as the body that actually looked like them. It goes back to my point, this is all multisensory integration and not appearance. So they all improved their mood and happiness with respect to the problem, and those, as I just said, those with the Freud body with visual motor synchrony had the better improvement. So the results suggest that in being embodied as Freud did have these good results. Why Freud? Well, we didn't know, we wanted to choose someone that everyone would know, a universally known person, and we didn't know who to choose, and we had loads of arguments about it, and in the end we did a survey amongst the population from which we would draw our sample, and we asked them, someone with whom you'd like to discuss a personal problem. And number 2 came Angelina Jolie, and number 1 came Freud. So it wouldn't have been my choice, but that's what we chose. So actually, we've just finished another big study with 60 participants at UB. I just got the data, I haven't analysed it yet. And there's similar studies with this idea is going on in Oxford with Daniel Freeman, and he's actually looking at it with patients with paranoia. So I'm going to go through this one very fast. Basically, the story is you're embodied as Einstein or another character, and you have a test beforehand, which is called the Tower of London test. Also, there's an implicit association test on age bias. And, well, there's nothing really to see in the video if I can ever get it working. You just move and you look around, you're embodied as Einstein or just a neutral character. And then after you've finished, you get this Tower of London test or a similar test again. And we measure the difference in performance pre and post. And so these are the results that those embodied as Einstein, their score difference on the test, they improved the test afterwards compared with those before. But more interesting than that is that if you divide it by esteem, those with lower self-esteem improve much more. So these ones in blue, this is the post-test minus the pre-test. Those with low self-esteem, in blue here, improve much more. Those with high self-esteem, nothing really changes. So I mean, this is a first ever experiment like this, so I don't want to draw too many conclusions, but if this result holds, well, we just have the paper in review now, so we have no idea what they're going to make of it. But if this result holds, it could be a nice way for kids or people with low self-esteem to use this idea of embodiment in someone they really respect, and then see how this might affect their performance. So it's just an idea.
And there was performance on a task in VR, so you didn't then give them a problem when they were back in their own body?
Yes, that's right, yes. The Tower of London test in VR, yeah.
Because it would be interesting to see whether it helps them post-VR.
Yes.
The way it did with the racial
Well, just like with the
bias.
racial bias, it would be good to know, does it last a week or 2 weeks and so on. Yeah.
Sad
Yeah.
otherwise to think like, oh, I have to be like
Yeah.
an old white-haired guy.
Yeah. And actually on the old white-haired guy, the bias against old people also decreases for those in the Einstein body. So that was good as well. And that just supports an earlier result by Ian Maylinson. So the last one is it's the 100th anniversary of the Russian Revolution, October and November, depending on which calendar you used. And I took this idea to the BBC about reproducing aspects of the Russian Revolution in VR to commemorate the anniversary. And they're very interested in how VR can be used for presenting news and storytelling. So we came together over this. And it relates to immersive journalism. This is, I'll say more about that on the next slide. Immersive journalism, so-called documentary reporting history. And it fits, the BBC mission is to inform, educate and entertain. And they were interested in whether actually being part of the story which you're trying to put over helps in people's interest and involvement and this kind of thing. So immersive journalism goes back to a paper by Noni de la Peña, the production of news in a form which people can gain first-person experience of the events or the situations described in news story. So the first one, actually she did this with us in Barcelona. She embodied people in a body that was in like a Guantanamo Bay interrogation center as part of just like giving people an experience of some small, tiny experience of what that might be like. But actually subsequent work never used really embodiment, and there's been quite a lot. So in subsequent work in immersive journalism, you don't have a body and you can't actually do anything, so you have this kind of ghost presence. You're there observing the events, but you can't do anything. It's just you're there, but you're invisible. And also you don't get plausibility, the illusion that the events are happening right now. That doesn't occur. It's like you're watching it on television, except you can turn your head around. So you get a kind of presence, but it's what I call a ghost presence. And there's been quite a few of these things. I mean, Noni went on to do Hunger in Los Angeles, where she showed people on a hunger line, Project Syria, how it is to be in an anti-abortion protest, one on domestic violence, and the BBC did a really nice one, where you are in the action a bit more, called We Wait, on the refugee crisis. And then there's been one on Pearl Harbor. And then there's been loads of stuff done on 360-degree type of VR. Chris Milt's Cloud Over Sigara, New York Times and The Guardian both have things you can download every day, which are 360 videos. So what we did is we took this picture and we brought it alive. And we had a number of different conditions. You are embodied as Lenin. You then give a speech as Lenin. And you're also embodied as someone in the crowd. In this one, you're just included in the crowd, but you're never Lenin. And in this last one, you only observe everything. You're like floating above it all, and you see it as if from the outside. So I'll show you a bit of how that looks, if I have time.
Yeah. People should feel free to leave if they have to, but I want to see it. So
this is not everyone had this. This is part of, is it working? Yeah. Don't know why. Some of them do that and some don't. So this is an embodiment phase that not everyone had. Some just observed it. They weren't part of it.
Look around the scene and
this is Leon Trotsky, for those of you who know your history. And there's marks on the wall. This is a replica of Lenin's own office in Moscow. And what we did is took the embodiment, this was the BBC's idea, take the embodiment phase and make it part of the story. So what we do is Trotsky is going to be telling Lenin what movements he should make.
Very important day for
but for us it's just embodiment.
Your speech has to be very convinced. We are going to practice some gestures you can use to emphasize points in your speech.
This is someone Spanish talking, has a really good Russian accent.
You will have to repeat them by looking to the mirror or to your own body. But let's begin relaxing your arms, moving them freely, and please look at your posture in the mirror's reflection.
This is just using a vibe with a head and two hands.
Now imagine yourself looking at our comrades and friends. Point to the right.
I think Lenin would turn in his grave if he knew Trotsky was telling him how to give a speech. Oh, he doesn't have a grave. He would turn in his mausoleum.
Point to the right with more emphasis. Now to the left.
So this is the scene on which we based it. There's another part where you are Lenin up there giving the talk, but I don't have the video of that. Here you're in the crowd. If you touch one of the characters around you, they look at you. So you see Trotsky standing there on the side. You can see it from his point of view as well. It gives you an idea of the crowd and so on. So this is a measure of what I call place illusion, your illusion of being there in the place, and it's highest in the embodied, medium in the included one, where you're not ever embodied as Lenin, but you actually are in the crowd. And this is the observing one, where you're just floating above everything. And this is plausibility. This is the illusion that what's happening is happening now, that it's really happening, that you know it's not happening, but you have the illusion that it is. Again, it's highest in the embodied, okay, in the included, and low in the observing. And then this is how much did Lenin's body feel like yours? Obviously, it's highest in the embodied condition. And then this is how much you'll be interested, curious, or follow up this afterwards. And it's, again, highest in the embodied, lowest in the observing. And finally, we asked participants that they were invited to follow up on a web page that gave more information about the history. And of the 60 people who did the experiment, 10 did the follow-up, which to me I was very disappointed it was only 10. 8 of those 10 were in the embodied or the included conditions, but the director of audiences for the BBC said, "We know how difficult it can be to drive audiences to online content. From all the BBC's research to date, we might expect a small proportion of the audience to go online to a related website after watching a TV program, for example." So whilst this was a small study, 17%, the 10 out of 60, is very impressive and potentially indicative of the significant impact VR could have at scale. So this was the real interest of the BBC. Is it worth doing the embodiment as one of the characters? Is it worth including you in it, or is it enough just to look? And the answer seems to be, from this study, that it is worthwhile having this embodiment phase as one of the characters. If not that, at least include the person in the action. So very brief conclusions. VR is usually thought of a method to transform where you are and what you're doing. The evidence suggests it could be a powerful method to change aspects of who you are. It's early days in all this. I don't want to put forward anything that I've said at all as a conclusion. It's a possibility and a hypothesis. And we're taking this forward in various social and health applications ourselves. And the funding is almost all EU funding. This one was Spanish government, and this was BBC research. And there's many, many people involved in all of this. That's it. Thanks. Thank you.
Questions? I have lots of questions. Well, one question I think I asked it when you were here last, maybe a year ago or 2 years ago. Of course, VR will especially be used as a medium for games, first-person experience types of games, and given that there are these serious implications for how this may affect people's own behavior and thoughts and so on after the game experience, I'm curious, is anyone like concerned about this, worrying about this? Because if you become like the person who shoots everybody up in a game and then you get, I mean, what does that affect the likelihood that you would do it in real life? It's really scary, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I have the same concern, and twice Anthony Steed from UCL and myself have put in project proposals to do long-term effects of virtual reality. It never mattered before because the only people using it were in industry and academics, but now it really matters. And everyone says, yeah, this is a really worthy project, but we're not going to fund it. So we don't have any funding to do this. But I think a long-term study of the long-term effects is really important, but we have to get money to do it. Yeah.
So I'm wondering the difference between the AR and VR. So is that possible for the racial problem, for example, like replace in the AR, but not in the VR, but in everyday life, you wear the AR glasses for 3 days, and everybody around is like, let's say, black or white, and what that would be the effect? Would it be like more stronger than the VR because that's in the real life, because VR in the virtual?
No, it's a good question. I don't know the answer because, I mean, I was never interested in AR because I never saw anything that was any good until Misha took me to the lab in Cambridge of the Microsoft lab, and I saw the HoloLens, and I thought, wow, this is really good, now I'm interested. And a few months later I saw the HoloLens again, and I thought, no, I can't use this, the field of view is too small. The first time I never noticed because she showed me good applications that didn't require a field of view. But with a HoloLens, you can't even look at a whole person, you'd have to keep going like that. But obviously it's going to come, and soon. And I saw what Magic Leap say that they're doing in their offices, and I've seen other possibilities. So I'm very, very interested in that question, but I really don't know the answer, no.
So I can see from a lot of your experiments, like the first step is like to make the user to perceive like the virtual character is like mimicking or
That's
something,
right.
have a mirror of that. So what happens if you don't do that, but just give them like the body when they look down, and also like the like the same movement?
Yes.
And then does it also have the same effect?
Okay, so the reason we use a mirror is that not in all of the experiments, but in some of the experiments, like imagine the Freud one. Imagine they're in the Freud body, but they don't have a mirror. They don't know they look like Freud. So that's the reason we use the mirror. But I think with many of the others, like including the racial bias, if you look down and you see the virtual body and the skin colors different, I think it would be the same. So we use the mirror only when we really need to, because we want them to know really how that body looks.
Yeah. The reason I'm asking this is because like if you have a mirror in there and then they have like a really direct perception of what they look like, what they do. So it's going to have, it's a hypothesis, but it's going to have like a strong effect of, well, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing. But for example, if in real games or like the example that you gave, if like there's a robot in remote, and then I just like have the vision in there and also like the presence in there, but I cannot see what I'm doing, then does it also have the strong effect, I mean, after the VR experience?
I don't know. We recently finished one study on this robotic embodiment, but we had the mirror because we wanted them to see how the robot looked. So I can't really answer the question, but I think it's a good one.
So if there's like a lot of concerns of like towards if like the VR experience is going to have like a strong impact after VR exposure, maybe this like self-perceptions in a virtual space is playing like a key role.
Yes, yeah, I think so. Yeah, yes, for sure. Yeah.
In terms of sort of positive societal implications, is anyone looking at maybe using this in schools or in organizational settings for education, the racial bias specifically?
Yes, I mean, can't go into details because of NDAs and everything, but a big company have asked us to do this. Yes, specifically on the racial bias. Yeah. There is interest in this. Even I wasn't there, but 2 days ago, one of our group went to a meeting in London, and immediately they wanted to do this for bias against women in the workplace and so on. So there's a very big interest in this. Yeah.
We are doing it in Israel now. We are trying to implement VR in the education system by leveraging VR technology, making the students see the world through the eyes of others.
Yeah.
We are just trying to, we are just started, but we are doing something similar, and we started with a gender issue, clip that asked the question when a compliment become an harassment. Very timely question.
Yeah.
And we are trying to implement.
The one I quite like is, although it's a very first study with only like 30 or 32 people, I like that because of the self-esteem aspect.
Yeah.
That if it's true that you take people with low self-esteem and you put them in a more esteemed body, that somehow it improves their performance, this would be really good for education. But I don't want to promise that that will work. Yeah.
Although maybe you want to do the opposite.
What's the opposite?
Well, put them in a body that they maybe subconsciously don't associate with performance, with smarts and intelligence and so on, and then have them perform amazingly in that other body, and then maybe they have more respect for whatever it is.
Yeah.
Short black women, or with high voices, or I don't know what the
I understand.
Yeah.
And I know this is probably not something anybody would want to test, but if self-esteem can go in one direction, then it has to go in the other direction as well, right?
Yes.
Because the whole thing is dependent on body perception.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess that's what Patty was alluding to earlier, is the concern that VR could be used for a lot of different
Many bad things, yeah.
And there's really no controlling it, I guess, other than it's the responsibility of the developers who are building it, right? Like there's really no other say.
At the moment, yeah. Sorry, I saw a question over there. Yeah.
Yes. So kind of in relation to your work on Illusory Agency, I was wondering if you've done any work on evaluating how sort of seeing an avatar you've controlled perform a certain behavior or a certain action will influence your opinion on that, and even like whether, maybe it looks exactly like you, right? You control yourself for a while, and then you see, in the mirror yourself doing something you would normally do. Would that affect your perception of that action?
So my interest in that is for positive reasons, that can you, for example, learn better motor skills that way? But you could also allude to quite negative things, that you could see your virtual body do something that you wouldn't normally do, and then you think, oh, it's okay then. But I've never done anything on that, so I don't know how that would work. Yeah.
Do you think, or have you shown or seen somewhere that the effect of embodying Einstein also occurs if you dress somebody in a costume, and you give them the clothes of Einstein and the wig and everything, like a high quality one, not just like a fun one for Halloween. Does that hold?
I don't see why it should be any different. It's more cumbersome to do that. Well, I suppose you avoid months of programming, but it's a bit more cumbersome. But I think it should work the same, especially if it was good, like you say.
To build on, the Backs of Giants, there's some very good affinity work done here. when you're talking about empathy, and you're a very expressive person. And so if you had watched her, she was moving her torso and her hands and her arms and her voice tones different. And so now, see, I helped start the first VR group on the eastern half of the United States. With them were 2 people, and we won awards at SIGGRAPH. Thousands of hours of coding went into it. But I was the multi-sensory, kinesthetic. Movement was important. Flock of birds was important. We kind of inspired and said, what we want that we can't do, you'll get some press for it. And so for the emotion part, you've got Rosalind Picard's wonderful work over the years, and having things as simple as, we actually had coding and also the hardware device people doing prototypes, like wearable bells. And she had one that, where you're in the chair, you're typing a lot, and you're forgetting your posture, and you're getting a backache. As a simple one that was like a sash, only smaller a little bit, to feel the movement and the heartbeat and the reminder. I think maybe it was a cushion as well. That like
I tried that once, yeah.
Yeah, and so there are those kinds of physical cues, like you said. If you put in scenarios, when I was at Northeastern University as media specialist, I chose 3 different schools to do video simulations. One was the school for moot court law, and where you are placing yourself. How talking about the voice. Well, when I actually put in a proposal for what they call it's a shared work situation. You've got a good job going, but you have a family too. So I was the one that's a girl coming in small, telling the CEO, how about you've tried this shared time, 2 people on a professional job, not just a filing job or a typing job, a professional job. And they were always afraid, there's going to have to be so much extra time for the whole day to overlap, whatever. No. And then I bring out the thing to look at outside of yourself, the proof of the pudding of, you're not going to be breaking ground here. 3M's on board. It has been for 10 years. They have the stats. They're getting money better because those workers are happier. They're doing better. They're with their family. So it's job share is what the term is.
Mm-hmm.
And so the analog is having more than one group that is working on the emotion, but also the physicality of learning and the loudness. And you choose multiple choices, very powerful. I had pre-recorded 5 or 10 different choices. If the judge said this, what would you say? And if you said that, you pick A through Z or whatever, and you pick that, and you see what was likely to happen based on subject matter experts, SMEs. So that they could go through at their repeat. The repeat is very important. We talked about motor skills. Of course that's important, not just physical therapy once a day, but every 20 minutes if they felt for a while, and then maybe not so much. So the feedback with the sensors of which, accelerometers, all that stuff, are very inexpensive now, and that special purpose stuff can be worked on. So that's why I thought, well, maybe checking in about the emotion thing with Rosalind, how that could work together with the experience. That way, the more effective the experience, the more thousands of times they'll get it, and it'll become subliminal. But to end, it's like when I went to college first year, I took judo. There was a demonstration of different things, and I took judo. And then the first week he said, okay, we got a 3-hour class. First hour is going to be for the whole year, 3 times a week. And the first hour is going to be falling. You are going to fall like you never felt before, and it's going to save your life. And at least save maiming and quality of life. It's going to be immensely, hugely. And every martial art is about awareness and being there in that place. When you're doing any of that stuff, even if it's graceful and slow, you become aware within that year. So the prelude is to suggest having a convenient place for them to go through this. Sometimes it might have to be a little sheltered in the library, like a carol they used to call them, sides, because you might feel a little bit, embarrassed about being expressive like I am with my hands. But the thousands of times are going to be worth it because they have a good, they have a goal to be retrained in their arm and or in their physicality. They will be able to practice going more slowly so people can understand them, like I have a tendency, especially when I'm rushed speech. But I have learned to enlarge my lungs and different ways to do that. So simulation is very powerful. That's why I went into the VR thing and started. Yeah. That's it.
Do we have another question?
I have a question. Have you done any or seen research that shows whether you can affect beliefs or worldviews from these experiences, such as religious beliefs or supernatural
yes.
beliefs.
Yes. So if you think what I've shown today is weird, I have done other things which are more weird. But so we did an experiment where we had people go into a virtual reality 6 days running, groups of 3 people, and they were in a fantastic island, and they had humanoid bodies but not human, and they had the body ownership and everything, and they had to do tasks together, and one by one each one died. They grew old and they died, and then finally each subject themselves dies, and when they die they have an out of the body experience. It's like the music accompanying it. They have an out of the body experience, there was music accompanying it, then they have a near-death experience where they go through the tunnel and everything, and so that they did. So what our idea was is to put them in a really fantastic world with friends. They didn't know these other people, the 2 other people. It was a shared virtual environment. The other 2 people in the environment they'd never met, they never knew who they were. But we wanted to make it so that they were in this island for a long time, they wouldn't want to leave, and eventually they actually do grow old and they die. And then of course they're in the real world. And what we were looking at is there's this whole literature on near-death experiences which shows that people who have them, in the main, their life improves quite a lot. They become more interested in global issues, less interested in material things, blah, 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 blah. And so we gave the standard questionnaires that they use in that field. Like there's been a big study published recently on that by, I forget his name, Parnia, I think his name. He's a doctor in London. And we found that indeed the people who had our experience compared with the control group, their interest in global issues and so on did improve a lot. So this is, you haven't seen this published because it's in review right now. I have no idea what their reviewers will make of it, but the results seem fairly convincing. So yes, it did in that level change beliefs, yeah.
There haven't been any studies that have looked at change past a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, right? Like nothing that's gone back to see someone changed after so much exposure in VR, and a year later they're still changed. Like they've actually become a different person.
No, I mean also, we did this one where we waited a week, but that's for experimental reasons. If you wait a year, they've gone. You know, you can't get them. So, but it would be really interesting to know that. And this is part of what we want to do for a study of the long-term effects, because no one knows this. You know what's going to happen. So it's dangerous. They're releasing this whole new thing in society, and no one has any idea what's going to happen with it.
Have they done any long-term studies on flight? Not that flight simulation. I mean, it's a different type of experience, but it's also something that's been around for 30-something more years.
Yeah.
And people have done it multiple times.
Yeah, but in a flight simulator, you are yourself controlling something really like the real thing, and the test is we're alive. You know, it's like we fly and it works because pilots typically only train on those. Yeah.
That's like the only one that's been going on.
Yeah, yeah, but it's not really virtual reality in the sense we have that they're in a real physical room and the room moves the same and everything. I mean, it's virtual flying, but it's not really virtual reality in the sense we mean. Yeah.
And has Jeremy Balanson done any longer-term studies looking at the effects of
I don't think longer term, no, not like that, no. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, you had mentioned earlier that having ownership over the body and then hearing your voice after also was changing the frequency in the voice.
Yes.
Because you felt as though it was your own voice.
Yes.
Yeah, I was like, and they were hearing the audio through like headphones.
Yeah, we tried various different ways, including binaural, but ordinary stereo was good enough, so that's what we used in the end. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No. Yeah, I was just wondering, like, so it was just like regular audio as if you were hearing. Okay.
Yeah, but remember, it's like when you're if you're wearing earphones, like when you're on a plane or something, you're wearing earphones and you see a movie over there, still the sound seems to come from over there. So you get this effect that you project the sound to where, in that case, where the vision is. Now here, the sound's coming from in here, but you're seeing synchronously your mouth on your virtual body move the same.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, in the mirror, yeah. So somehow people internalize it. So we tried binaural and stereo and mono and so on, and in the end they didn't like the binaural and the stereo seemed to be the best, so we just used it. But I think this is a very interesting area of research, also dangerous, though, in the sense of convincing people they're saying something they're not saying.
It might be an interesting way to try teaching people things.
Teaching language learning, which somebody here is interested in, it could be very useful for that, yeah. Okay.
Probably wrap up. Thank
Okay,
you so
you're
much.
welcome. Thanks.